everybody. We are live. This is Tuesday MMA Talk with Michael Hutchinson, and it is good to be back. Unfortunately, we were off last week because I was dealing with a hell of a sickness. I've not been feeling good over the past week and a half, and it'll probably show up at some point during the show. So I've had to deal with that this week. Also, planned for the show, we have an interview with Rick Story that will be coming up in about 20-25 minutes. But we did have an interview planned with this guy. That guy right there, Luke Rockhold. We had that planned for this week. It was all set up 5 minutes before the interview. And unfortunately, things fell apart. So I'm really hoping that the next show for you guys, I will be able to get Luke Rockhold on the show. That would be a pretty sick interview. Me and him talked back in February at AKA about his fight with Chris Weidman. And we had a good talk there. I was hoping to get to talk to him again, but might have to save that for next week. Hopefully we get him on the show. But that's next week's show. This week's show, we have Connor Ruebusch of the Heavy Hands podcast. He is on the show today. Me and him talk UFC 198. What went down? What did Fabricio Werdum do in the fight against Stipe Miocic? How did he get knocked out? Why was he striking so recklessly? Me and Connor talk about that. That's coming up in a couple of minutes. And then, like I said, we have UFC welterweight Rick Story on the show. That'll be at around 2:20. We talk everything from his time off, because he's been gone for about a year now with injuries. He also talks about ring rust and talks about his fight at UFC Fight Night 88 against Tarec Saffiedine. So that's what we have for you on the show today. For me today, I'm pretty excited. Today is a big day for Canadian sports fans. We have the Toronto Raptors playing the Cleveland Cavaliers in Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Can't wait for that, but you guys are here to listen about MMA. Me and Connor actually go back and forth a little bit on that because he's from Ohio. And speaking of Cleveland, Stipe Miocic, the new UFC heavyweight champion. I did a live stream on Facebook, and I should have actually saved the video and showed you guys my reaction. I looked down for 1 second, looked up, and all of a sudden, Fabricio Werdum face planted. I was so shocked and so surprised. I had Fabricio Werdum just destroying Miocic in every way possible. That was my prediction. I was just like, no, I have this prediction. This is going to happen. And as usual, I am always wrong. I am like Nam Fan when it comes to predictions. If I predict a fight, bet the opposite, because it usually happens. And that's exactly what happened. That was a shocking finish. And for those who did pick Miocic, I know a lot of people in the comments said that they thought Miocic was going to get the first round KO, but I don't think many people expected it to go down as it did. Just, wow, absolutely shocking. There are more fights on the card, but me and Connor Ruebusch, we talk about that. So I'm going to play for you guys right now me and Connor's talk about UFC 198, everything that went down, technique talking, everything. Here it is. Joining me on Tuesday MMA Talk, talking about UFC 198, we have Connor Ruebusch of the Heavy Hands podcast. Connor, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for having me.
No problem. So a lot happened this weekend. A lot of Brazilians got the win, but their one big guy, Fabricio Werdum, knocked out by Ohio's own Stipe Miocic. Now, you're from Ohio, right?
I am.
Well, this is awkward because I'm from Toronto, and you know what's happening tonight, right?
I don't think I actually do. What's happening tonight?
The Cleveland Cavaliers, Ohio's basketball team, is against the Toronto Raptors.
Well, if I knew anything about sports that didn't legally involve face punching, of course, recently baseball decided that it wanted to have some face punching too. But Yeah, good luck with that. I'll just root for my MMA fighters, and I'll stick with that.
Cool. So then you're allowed on the show today because you don't care about the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Neutral party as far as the Cavaliers go.
Yeah. But talking about Cleveland, Stipe Miocic knocked out Fabricio Verdum. What did you think about that fight?
It's honestly, my first feeling is that it could have been so much better.
Yeah,
it was a really stunning ending, but the finish happened on the back of a really strange tactical error. And to Miocic's credit, he seemed to be doing a decent job of dealing with Verdum at range. Verdum wasn't running away with that first round, and Miocic was probably turning the momentum as the round neared its end. But people have pointed to the fact that Miocic landed his jab, landed a right hand, got in that sneaky left uppercut. That's the reason Verdum was forced to make that reckless charge. And I don't really buy that. I can't give all the credit to Verdum's strange tactical decision to Miocic, because this is a guy who's been knocked down by Mark Hunt and Cain Velasquez and Travis Brown. This is a guy who has eaten tons of hard shots from Roy Nelson, went toe-to-toe with Velasquez before beating him. This is a guy who is used to things not necessarily going his way off the bat, and who still typically succeeds in being a fairly smart, tactical, collected fighter. So whether it was the 45,000 Brazilian fans in attendance, or a bunch of pressure he put on himself, or whether he was overconfident in his ability to turn the tide and absorb punishment because of the Velasquez fight, I don't know. But it was very strange the way Verdum decided to just run after Miocic, both hands flailing, completely out of his stance, chin first, right into a very short punch that normally I don't think wouldn't have even hurt him had he not been running full force into it. It was just a really weird way for the fight to end.
Yeah, it almost reminded me of Jose Aldo against Conor McGregor.
Yeah,
the way that Jose Aldo kind of just stepped in and then got hit right off the bat. And because there was just so much excitement in the air, Aldo was a little nervous. That all kind of collided, and just one big tactical mistake that we're not used to seeing from Verdum, and same from Aldo. We're not used to seeing him do that type of thing.
Yeah, and it was, Aldo's was at least like a setup punch. Aldo's made a little bit of sense. He went to the chest with the right hand and came up with the left hook, and he landed it even as he was unconscious. He managed to slice McGregor's eye open, so that was to his credit, I guess. He figured that McGregor would worry about the right hand, and really he just looked to counter the first thing he saw. For Verdum, it was not even a technical attack. It was just right, left, throwing at the head, no changing of targets. And, Verdum has good cage craft too, but he was just following Miocic along the side of the cage. Somebody said this, I wish I could remember who, but they said somehow Fabricio Verdum managed to give Stipe Miocic the opportunity to land the one punch he lands in every single fight. Yeah. Because that hop step right hand counter is everything Miocic does. Like, everything he does is that single shot, and Verdum gave it to him. It's very weird.
Yeah, so people that would argue that this fight showed that Miocic had the better stand-up than Verdum, because Verdum's stand-up going into the fight, people were just... There was so much credit to it that he was so highly touted, had worked on it so much. And now it kind of looks like, oh, well, you have a guy who is a really good stand-up technical boxer that just kind of floored him and made him look really bad.
Yeah, Miocic is a very good striker too, and I think he is getting better. It's hard to keep in mind that he's only been doing this for, I think, 6 years now. He's 33, the same age as Cain Velasquez, I believe. But in terms of wear and tear and cage experience, he's significantly younger than most other fighters in the elite of this division. And so as his defense continues to improve and his footwork gets a little tighter, and he becomes more disciplined and less prone to kind of freaking out and going for every big shot he sees, like he did at times in the Dos Santos fight, then I think that makes him a really solid fighter. I certainly didn't expect him to run over Fabricio Verdum, and until that punch, I don't think he was, but he was definitely having his moments. And of the two, he was doing a little more adjusting than Verdum. He was checking the kicks. He was keeping the jab out there. He was doing an okay job. He stayed cool and collected, more so than Verdum did. So he definitely deserves credit for this win. It was just a weirdly unsatisfactory way to see the title change hands for me.
Yeah, it was definitely weird because I was watching the video with my brother, and like we didn't really see it coming. It was just like, oh, it was one of those like shock. It was kind of like the Conor McGregor Aldo, going back to that. We're just like, oh, it's done. I wish I'd seen more. I'd rather him have hit
Yeah.
Verdum get rocked, and then Miocic go after him, pound him out. Instead, it was just like, oh, we're done.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, it was
cool.
it was when Aldo happened, I remember because I was really gunning for Aldo in that fight. When Aldo McGregor happened, I remember screaming, "Oh no." Like Macaulay
Yeah,
Culkin from Home Alone, both hands to my face. Uh, when the Miocic one happened, I could only laugh because it was such a silly way to get knocked out. Like
yeah,
just running recklessly after someone. It was so bizarre and so out of character for Verdum. And Verdum, he's been reckless in the past. You know, he will brawl when he needs to brawl, but never like that. I've never seen him just because he even got stung before the knockout happened. He came in after Verdum, after Miocic with the punching combinations and got hit with the right hand. And then it's like he got angry or frustrated or something and then just renewed his assault and got hit a second time and it put him out. So I had to chuckle when it was happening live because it was it was just unbelievable. It's not the way you expect to see any UFC title change hands. It
yeah.
really.
On top of that, the Brazilian fans, no matter
Oh,
what, if it's a good fight or it's a bad fight, if a Brazilian isn't winning the fight, you will
yeah.
hear nothing out of the crowd. The
It's
second the
my
knockout punch landed, just nothing. It
it's
was
my favorite kind
hilarious.
of crowd reaction in the entire sport of MMA. And it's not that I dislike Brazilians or that I like to see them lose or anything, but it's so completely at odds with what the reaction should be for a stunning KO.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like when Shogun Hua was knocked out by Ovince St. Preux. Even if you're there to support Shogun, you're gonna cry
Yeah,
out. You're
you're
gonna
gonna
be
gasp.
surprised.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's gonna be a collective surprise in every other arena in the world. But in Brazil,
there's just
it's just a
nothing.
barely a dull murmur. It's just almost it's as close to utter silence as you can get in a packed arena. It always makes me giggle.
Now, for somebody that studies striking, your mouth must be watering at the thought of Stipe Miocic against Alistair Overeem. That seems like that would be a nice technical heavyweight championship fight. If you were to give an early prediction for that fight, what do you think we would see from either guy?
Yeah, it's a tough one to call. Who has Stipe Miocic faced that? Because a lot of times when I try to look for predictions, I will go the soft MMA math route and
Yeah.
try to evaluate what they've shown in similar matchups.
Yeah, he did fight Junior Dos Santos.
Sure.
That's, yeah, a very different fight though. And Alistair Overeem has showed now that he's not going to do what Fabricio Verdum did in running
Right.
forward. Alistair Overeem, his style lately has kind of been just lay back, wait for the guy to come forward, and then catch them.
Right. I would have given Miocic a pretty easy pick actually if Overeem was still, you know, Ubereem, if he was still
Yeah.
trying to do the first round mauling thing that became his style for so many years. But he has really become patient and poised, and really, I think his changes have because Overeem's always been a little bit of a bully, where he tends to kind of fold. I think he puts a lot of pressure on himself to be in control at all times, and when it's not, then I don't want to say he quits, but somewhere in his mind he starts to feel that things aren't going in his favor. He doesn't always seem to feel like he can bring the fight back from the brink. So his career doesn't have a lot of comebacks. Instead, it has a lot of good performances that suddenly nosedive. And recently, I think this style where he's now this kind of tricky outfighter who picks his spots, it helps with that because he no longer has this immense pressure to put the guy away and then get exhausted in the process. He can feel like he's in control of the fight, even if he's not knocking the other guy's head off. So I don't really know how Miocic deals with a good outfighter like that. Normally, he's the one who has his opponent coming after him, and he can throw those backstepping counters and try to use his lateral movement. He moves pretty well for a heavyweight, but so does Alistair Overeem. I kind of like Overeem. I'm going to be honest. I kind of like Overeem because of the variety. Of course, with Overeem, he's definitely more fragile than Miocic. So any one mistake is more likely to end his night than it is Stipe's. But I kind of think with his variety and his weird movement, he doesn't stick to the kind of traditional boxing things that Miocic likes to do. I think that might throw Miocic for a loop, but I'll have to watch a lot of footage before I come down with any concrete prediction.
Yeah, and that fight probably wouldn't be until UFC. Maybe that's the UFC 200 fight that they keep teasing. Maybe they'll put that on, or maybe 201, 202. But we do have a while, so I guess people will look out for your prediction on that on the podcast. One more fight to analyze. Not a lot of striking in it, and then I'll let you go. We had Vitor Belfort against Jacare Souza, where Vitor Belfort didn't really do anything. We're so used to Vitor coming out just ambushing people, bang, 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 bang. And if it doesn't work, he loses. And if it works, then he gets a knockout of the night. What do you think happened there? Why didn't he pull that trigger?
I don't know. Vitor's a weird guy. I think he has this thing where he banks really hard on a single technique that's going to be his saving grace, and that, like Overeem, who would bank on that rush, when it isn't, everything falls apart for him. And for John Jones, he seemed really committed to that armbar. He kept going for it as the fight went on, but once it didn't get the tap the first time, you could just see in his body language and everything, it was downhill. Against Jacare, he seemed to have come in really expecting flying knees to be the thing, because he kept jumping when Jacare was coming towards him, hoping, I guess, to counter a takedown. So maybe I think with Vitor, he tends to get into this mode where he has one thing in his mind. He has this technique in his mind, and rather than letting it come organically, he seems to wait for it. Pointedly, he looks for the opportunity to use it, and so he lets a bunch of other opportunities go by. And I think that's what happened against Jacare. Jacare did a good job of putting pressure on him. But the thing with Jacare is you can beat him with volume. He doesn't throw a lot. He does a lot of stalking, like a minute of stalking for every 2 or 3 punches he throws. Yeah. But the problem is he is a fantastic wrestler. But you know what I mean? The weird thing is that Vitor ended up pulling guard in that fight. That's the most bizarre thing.
Part. Was that like when I saw that, I was just like, are you giving up? I know Vitor won't give up, and I give him all the respect in the world, but that's not what you do against Jacare Souza, especially since in the last time you lost, it was a guy getting on top of you and pounding you out. It was exactly the same as the Chris Weidman fight.
Yeah, so he now has a guy on top of him who is probably noticeably better than Chris Weidman in terms of top control. Like the guy with the best jiu-jitsu credentials in the entire division. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's just Vitor's weird mentality is that he when his original strategy doesn't work out for him, he just can't keep it together. And so, I mean, I can come up with no other explanation for why it would seem to him at the time a good idea to pull guard on Ronaldo Souza. I have no idea, but Jacare looked good. I expected him to win this fight. You know, I went into this thinking he felt like one of the heavier favorites on the card. Yeah, so he's one fight off of the Yoel Romero loss. But Romero, it was a very close fight. A lot of people thought Jacare won, and Romero is now on the sidelines because of his drug test failure. So I think Jacare has more than earned a shot at the title, and I would be happy to see him rematch either Rockhold or Weidman.
Yeah, and those would be great fights. I would have to predict that Rockhold is probably going to get the win over Weidman just because we don't see a lot of instant rematches where the guy who lost the first fight wins. So in your opinion, if we were to see Rockhold against Jacare, again, nothing against Weidman, not saying he's going to lose, but if I were to predict what the most likely outcome is, Jacare against Rockhold, did you see anything in that Rockhold? I mean, in the Jacare Vitor Belfort fight that you saw that Jacare would use against Rockhold, or was it just like as expected?
I think Jacare is in the unfortunate position where basically everything he does well is something that Luke Rockhold is really good at stopping. Rockhold's style is the anti-AKA style because he's the only guy at AKA with his frame. He's this tall, long guy among guys like Cain Velasquez and Daniel Cormier, and even guys like Josh Thompson and Koscheck. Yeah, right. Yeah. So most of these guys are like stocky or average height at best, and Rockhold is this weird, lanky guy. And so I think working with guys like Velasquez and Cormier, who would be his main training partners, he's developed this sort of counter stocky wrestler style where he's now very, very good at when he had to try and go for takedowns against Vitor Belfort, he didn't look so great. He was okay. But when he can stop your takedowns like he did to Weidman and Tim Boach, when he can counter your takedowns and work for your back or catch you in a submission while you're trying to get him on the ground, he's very, very dangerous. And he's longer and cleaner technically than he was the first time he fought Jacare. It's really hard for me to see Jacare either throwing enough volume or being an effective enough wrestler to get this fight to a place where he can consistently score points. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining me on the show today. Is there anything that you want to pimp out, your podcast, your next episode, guests that you have coming up in the future?
Check out Heavy Hands with me and Patrick Wyman. We just had an interview with Dominic Cruz. So if you're looking, we're going to be talking about stuff. We're recording this week's episode tonight, but Dominic Cruz was a fantastic interview. You should check him out. Also, if you're interested in hearing more about the Chris Weidman Luke Rockhold rematch, we interviewed Mark Henry, the coach of Frankie Edgar, Edson Barboza, Marlon Moraes, among others, and he is training Chris Weidman for the Luke Rockhold rematch. So there's a little bit of insight there as well.
Awesome. Connor, thanks.
Thank you.
Joining me is veteran UFC welterweight Rick Story, who fights Tarec Saffiedine in a couple of weeks at UFC Fight Night 88. Rick, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot.
So the last time you fought, it was a long time ago. Reebok wasn't even a part of the UFC. USADA wasn't around. Johnny Hendricks was the welterweight champion. A lot has changed since you last fought. Now we know what's happened in the UFC, but what's been going on in your life in the past year and a half?
The only thing that's been going on is just getting healthy. Well, actually, I was training for Eric Silva, so it was get prepared to fight Eric Silva, and then I got hurt, and then sitting on the sidelines, it just seemed like everyone's fighting, and I'm just sitting on the sidelines, so I was just anxious to get out and get fighting again.
Mm-hmm. And I've taken a couple of PR classes, so we're going to practice something right here. I'll pretend to be your PR guy. You're going to get asked this 100 times during fight week about ring rust. That's going to be super annoying for you. So let's figure out a way to answer this question. So what do you got? How are you going to answer the question of ring rust?
Ring rust? Well, it's going to get knocked off when I get back in there, if it's a true thing or not. I don't know. I just think the whole ring rust thing is a psychological thing. Just not, if you're going in thinking about not fighting for a long time, then you're going to go out and fight like you haven't fought in a long time. But if you're preparing and training the way that you should be and you're confident in yourself, I don't think that there should be any kind of hesitation just because you're in a different setting. You're like on a stage instead of in your own gym training. So, I don't know. I feel like I can look past the time that I've been sitting off and just come out and jump right back into things.
And is it going to be annoying for you to have to answer that question over and over and over again during fight week? Because that'll probably be the number one question that most people ask you.
Well, definitely if people tune into this and hear what I just said, hopefully they can just plug that in. But, yeah, it'll probably get annoying.
Yeah, I have a piece of advice. Just tell them right off the bat, well, the UFC does a good job maintaining their rings. I don't think there's going to be any rust. Just kind of play it off as a joke. That way nobody asks you that again.
Yeah, make it literal.
Yeah, so the last time you fought Gunnar Nelson, and I think it was a dominant win. It ended up being a split decision, but I think everybody thought that was a clear win for you. But since there's been so much time since that fight, it kind of feels like you've been forgotten in the welterweight division. Are you worried about that, or does that kind of not matter to you, that this performance against Tarec Saffiedine will just get you right back into things?
No, that doesn't really matter to me. Anybody that knows anything in the welterweight division knows that, I'm someone that they have to take seriously when they fight. And then as far as people viewing or fans or whatnot, I'm sure when they see this fight that they'll get captivated again and be excited once more. Just because I can't change who I am and how I go out there and perform. It's just kind of, I get hit and then it's on. So, we'll see.
Yeah, and the amazing thing about you is that you have 6 losses in the UFC, but right now you're ranked higher than almost every single person that you've beaten other than Damian Maia. You've been able to stay in the UFC and at the top of the welterweight division for so long. How have you been able to do that? Because whenever you lose, you just come back and win another fight. You've been very consistent throughout your whole career.
Yeah, every time that I've lost, I've gone back to the drawing board or I've learned from it, and there's been like some mistake and figured it out and just try to move on without making that same mistake again. And, I go out with different game plans every fight for different fighters. And just as long as it's the right one, I usually come out on top.
Now, you have one of the most interesting nicknames in the sport, the Horror Story. Do you have any interesting horror stories to tell us about? Maybe about your life, bad weight cut, anything like that?
Okay. There's one weight cut before I got into the UFC, where the check scale was about 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds heavy.
Oh, no.
And then when I stepped on the scale after being dry for about 1.5 hours in between scales, and I stepped on the scale, I was 2 pounds heavier. And then I was cutting weight for 2 more hours to lose about 1.5 pounds. And it was the worst thing on the planet. My kidneys were hurting, and I just never wanted to see another sauna again.
Dang, I can't imagine that. I wrestled a bit in high school, and when you're in high school, weight cutting is not like what you guys do. It's brutal. What you guys do is brutal too, but when you're in high school and you have no idea what you're doing, you just completely dehydrate yourself. Now, do you think weight cutting is a thing that should stay in the sport? Because there's just been so much against weight cutting recently, the bad health effects that it has. Is that something that you would like to see be eliminated from the sport?
Not necessarily, just because, just like in wrestling, it teaches kind of discipline that you can't get in any other sports. I don't know. I just think it's more impressive for a person to be able to cut weight and perform, but maybe not as drastically, maybe not as much weight. But shoot, when I first did it, that horror story that I was telling you about, I cut 22 pounds in about an 18-hour period.
Dang.
And that was like the worst thing on the planet. So I learned, like we were saying earlier, like me learning from like experiences. Yeah, I've never done that again.
Wow. So you have a history training at TriStar. You trained with Georges St. Pierre in his lead up to Johnny Hendricks' fight. Rory McDonald is the last person to beat the person you're fighting next, Tarec Saffiedine. Have you been able to talk to Rory McDonald, maybe get some advice from him?
No, I haven't even reached out. Pretty much just watching footage on how he implemented his game plan and what he did differently than what he did in other fights, and just use that kind of reasoning to kind of supplement my game plan.
And what did you see when you watched the tapes? Is there anything that Saffiedine does that you can kind of point out? Because he's a very good overall fighter.
Well, I mean, if I was going to go and say this or say it on here, and then he was to listen to this interview, he would know what to defend against.
That's true.
And I don't have any curveballs to throw him. So, I mean, I'll just leave it at this: if he hits me in the face, I'm going to be right in his face, throwing punches back.
Nice. Well, I look forward to seeing that fight. Thank you for joining the show, and good luck at UFC Fight Night 88.
All right, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
No problem. All right, so that was my interview with Rick Story. When we went to that interview, I ended up seeing on my phone that a lot of people messaging saying, hey man, your audio's not working. So that's what happens when you do live streaming and stuff. Sometimes things don't work, and unfortunately, my mic was off for that whole last section before Rick Story talked. So that's really unfortunate. But thank you, Rick Story, for coming on the show and talking about his upcoming fight. So since nobody was able to hear me for the last section, I guess we'll pretty much just go over what I talked about last time, and then we'll wrap things up, because I'm sure the people watching had to watch me for a couple of minutes with just absolutely no sound. So we'll go back to what I was talking about beforehand. We were talking about UFC 198. The main event was Miocic against Verdum. We talked about that with Connor Ruebusch. We also talked about Jacare Souza against Vitor Belfort. What we didn't talk about was Cyborg's debut in the UFC. At UFC 198, she demolished Leslie Smith, just absolutely destroyed her. I thought that the stoppage was a little early, but again, she was probably going to win anyways. But we have a question from Kurt Martineau, and the question is, Cyborg's debut was nothing short of spectacular to me personally, but what do you do with her now? Now, I've often accused the UFC of protecting Ronda Rousey from Cyborg, or Ronda making as many excuses not to fight her. In retrospect, after Rousey's dismantling at the hands of Holly Holm, I can see why the UFC would protect their money bag. But now, is it time for Ronda to drop the act and face Cyborg at MSG? This is not only huge for the fans, but the UFC as well. What do you think, Mike? Well, what do I think, Kurt? I think that right now, both fighters are in a very, very awkward position. I'll start with Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey's in a position where she doesn't necessarily need to come back to fighting. She could continue acting, and I don't know how long that would last, but she probably has enough money right now to just stay out of MMA and just do her own thing outside of the sport. So she has that to go to. And if she does want to come back, I think the only thing she would come back for is revenge against Holly Holm, or for her championship, fighting Miesha Tate. Now, Cyborg, why would she want to fight Cyborg? The only thing that Cyborg has for her is reputation of going down as the baddest woman to ever fight. That's the only reason she would fight Cyborg. Other than that, Cyborg doesn't have a championship that Ronda can win. Cyborg isn't a bigger draw than Holly Holm or Miesha Tate. She's going to be a big draw, but she's not at the standard that Holly Holm and Miesha Tate are at, because both of those women have showed that they can sell pay-per-views, that they have a lot of people on social media. Cyborg isn't quite there yet. So what does Cyborg have for Ronda Rousey? Really not a lot. Now going over to Cyborg, what does she do next? She said that she wanted to defend her title in Invicta. That does nothing for anybody. She's just going to have another squash match, and that doesn't mean anything for anybody. Now, if she was to have her next fight in the UFC, would it be a catchweight fight? Well, why would any bantamweight woman want to go up and fight Cyborg at 140? They have nothing to win from it. If she was to come down to 135, who would want to fight her? Again, maybe Kat Zingano, but what does she win from beating Cyborg? Really nothing. Maybe she would get a title shot off of it. Maybe. Miesha Tate has the title already. That does nothing for her. Holly Holm already beat Ronda Rousey, had the championship. There's no reason for her to fight Cyborg. Cyborg isn't at the top of the division. It wouldn't get her another title shot. Cyborg's just in a really weird place where she needs women to fight her, and there's no woman that's going to be willing to fight her because they have everything to lose and very, very little to gain. So that's my opinion on the whole Cyborg Rousey thing. I really doubt that we're going to see that happen anytime soon. So we've been streaming now for 43 minutes. A lot of those minutes, unfortunately, you couldn't hear me. Hopefully we'll get that audio stuff fixed in later shows. I apologize for that. Let's go to one last topic because I saw people debating it on Twitter. My good friends James Lynch, Nick Baldwin, and Carlin Bardsley, they were talking about what's going to happen after UFC 199. Let's just say Luke Rockhold wins the champion or defends his championship. Who's he going to fight next? Should it be Michael Bisping or Jacare Souza? I'm in the opinion that Jacare Souza is clearly the front runner, that he should get the next title shot. But a lot of people are saying that Michael Bisping deserves that shot. Now, I will hopefully get the chance to talk to Michael Bisping sometime soon. I've been trying to set up an interview with him for a while, and hopefully I can get him on the show to tell his side of the story and why he deserves a shot at the middleweight championship. But right now, I think Jacare, he's beaten better guys. I think the Anderson Silva fight was really too close to call to give Bisping that title shot. And again, I mean, if he's fighting Luke Rockhold, we've already seen that fight once. And yeah, it was a while ago, but Luke Rockhold showed that he can destroy Bisping. So, but then again, we saw way long ago Rockhold and Jacare fight. But I think that's a lot more interesting rematch between Jacare and Rockhold. But then again, Chris Weidman, let's not forget about him. I've been kind of underselling him. He does have a chance at beating Rockhold at UFC 199. So look forward to that. That is the next pay-per-view event. I think we should wrap things up here. Thank you for Connor Ruebusch joining the show and Rick Story for joining the show too. I apologize again for the audio issues. Hopefully we will get all of that stuff fixed up for next week's show. Next week's show, right now we don't have any guests lined up, but follow me on Twitter at @TheMikeyHutch, and I will tweet as soon as I know who will be on next week's show. Thank you guys for watching, and hopefully see you